How do we use modes? It's one thing to know them, but another thing to know how to use them. That's what we're going to explore in this video. In my last video, Demystifying Modes, we learned what modes are. If you didn't catch that video and aren't up to speed, or maybe you have found the subject confusing, please make sure to go back and watch that video first. But how do we use modes? There are at least two ways that I can think of: inside and outside. By inside, I mean within keys, within chord progressions. The second way is to use modes to add outside notes, to get more color, like what is done in jazz. Let's explore both. Okay, so if you watched my last video on modes, demystifying modes, I talked about the idea of grouping modes into two categories: major modes and minor modes. And that's the best way I can present this first section, especially on the subject of playing inside of modes. I also did another video on the number system. If you didn't watch that, you're at risk of me losing you, because I'm going to communicate all this within the context of numbers. That's the best way to think of this stuff. You don't want to have to memorize 12 rules, one for each chord or key you're in. You want to memorize the numbers. So if you didn't watch that, if you don't know the number system, you're going to want to check that out as well. So, because what we're going to do is we're looking at major chord progressions for our major modes, and we're looking for deviations from the number system. So the number system is 1, 4, 5 is major, 2, 3, 6 is minor, and 7 is the 5/7. Most people teach it as diminished. I teach it as 5/7. So if we find a deviation from that, we can't just simply, in a key of C, play C Ionian, C major. We're going to play a mode of C. I almost said Lydian because that's the first one I'm going to run and show you. If we find, instead of the 2 minor, we see a 2 major in an otherwise major chord progression, we're looking at Lydian. In key of C, that means D minor becomes D major. We're looking at C Lydian. By the way, if you find that the 7 is minor instead of diminished, meaning a B minor instead of B diminished, that's also Lydian, C Lydian. But I don't really like the sound of that one as well, so I'm not going to show you that one today, but we're going to play the looper. You're going to hear me play a C major and a D major chord. It's a 1 major and a 2 major, and the C is clearly the key that I'm in, and so it's the tonal center, but we need to think of it in terms of C Lydian. I know I'm in key of G major. You could think of this as 4 or 5. The problem is everything lands on the 1. That's why we think of modes. Remember the first video I talked about modes are used whenever the tonal center is different than the first scale degree of the key you're in. So I might be in the key signature of G major, but I'm in the key of C because C is the tonal center. It's the 4th scale degree of the key of G major, or the key signature of G major. So we're thinking C Lydian. I hope you followed that. I know that's confusing. So anyhow, the point, just to keep it simple, is if you're in a major key and you see the 2 become major instead of minor, it's Lydian. I'm going to play the looper, and I'm going to play the scale slowly so you can hear it, and then I'm going to jam over it so you can hear it as well. Let's see what it sounds like. So that's C Lydian. I could have also, by the way, played C major pentatonic over it, and then basically I'm just cheating the modes or bypassing the modes. Let's hear that really quick. See how that C is the note everything revolves and around and resolves to or rests to. So the next mode, next major mode we want to talk about is Mixolydian. The identifiers for Mixolydian in a chord progression, most common one I see is the flat 7 major chord. So in a key of C, if you see a B flat major, instead of, you're supposed to see a B diminished, or as I say, G over B. If you see a B flat major instead in key of C, that's C Mixolydian. The other one you might see is a G minor. It'd be the 5 minor. If you see a G minor instead of a G major in a key of C, again, you're looking at Mixolydian. So I'm going to play the looper. We're going to hear the chord progression. I'll play the scale slowly over it, and then I'll jam away at it so you can hear it. And at the end, of it, I'll try to remember to throw in some C major pentatonic instead. C major pentatonic. See, that C is the resting note. So those are the major modes. Now let's move on to the minors. So for the minors, I'm going to use the key of A minor, again, because it's the relative minor to C major, no sharps, no flats, a little easier to think about in terms of music theory. In the key of A minor, now, there's two ways to number things when you think of the number system. The way I normally think of it is, if I'm in the key of A minor, I think of it as the 6th chord. I just tell myself everything revolves around the 6th chord, and that allows me to think of the same numbers as I think of in major keys. However, you could instead say, 1, 4, 5 is major, 3, 6, and 7 is minor. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. You could instead say 1, 4, 5 are minor, 3, 6, and 7 are major, and 2 is diminished. So I'm going to present it that way, speak of it that way today. So we're going to number everything according to A minor being the 1 chord. And if we see a deviation from the pattern I just described, we're looking, if we see specific types of deviations, we're looking at a modal chord progression. So this first one is for the, in the key of A minor, if I see a 4 major chord instead of a 4 minor chord, I'm looking at a Dorian chord progression. So let's hear the looper. I'll play the scale over it, the A Dorian, and then I'll jam away at it. And then I'll try to again remember to play an A minor pentatonic over it at the end. So let's see what it sounds like. minor pentatonic. There's a diatonic note. Now I'm back to pentatonic. You can hear again, everything wants to land on that A. Now one thing I forgot to mention for Dorian is if you're in a minor key and instead of seeing the 6 major, you see a sharp 6 diminished. That'd be, instead of an F major, you'd see an F sharp diminished. That's also a sign of Dorian. However, I don't dwell on those, and as I said, for major keys, I teach instead of playing the 7 diminished, play 5/7. That's because diminished chords are better used as passing chords instead of diatonically. So if you don't know what that means, well, look it up on Google or wait for me to do another video where I'll talk about passing chords. But for now, just know that that's why I just taught you one deviation with Dorian, and that is the 4 major instead of 4 minor. So next up is Phrygian. So with Phrygian, if you're in the key of A minor and you were to see a flat 2 as a major chord, because normally you're going to see, it's not going to be flat 2, it's going to be a natural 2, and it's going to be minor. So if you see a flat 2 and it's major, so in a key of A minor, instead of seeing B minor, you see a B flat major. That's a sign that you're looking at Phrygian instead. I should also point out that if you see the 7 minor in the key of A minor instead of a 7 major, that would also be Phrygian. So I don't see that as often. The most common one I see is the flat 2 major. So let's get the looper out. Let me play the scales over it, and let's see what it sounds like. Here's A minor, pentatonic. Well, I'm really not going to cover Locrian. I never play in Locrian. Maybe I should. Maybe it shows my limitations, but Locrian's a diminished mode, and I just don't find that flat 5 is a very pleasing sound. But, you know, obviously if the 1 chord is diminished instead of major or minor, then you're looking at a Locrian chord progression. So that's the easiest way to identify it. Okay, now let's talk about playing outside. So when I talk about playing outside, and you hear this term used a lot in jazz, the idea is to bring in notes from outside of the key. Now, I'm going to kind of baby step us into this by first talking about what I call ambiguous chord progressions. An ambiguous chord progression, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a chord progression. It could be just droning notes. So let's actually start there. The idea with ambiguity is if you don't have enough notes in the chord progression of the song to firmly communicate or signal a key, then you have more than one option, okay? As an example, if you heard a C and an F chord together, that could be the 1 and the 4 chord, or it could be the 5 and the 1 chord. So it could be the 1 and the 4 chord in the key of C, or the 5 and the 1 chord in the key of F. You could go with C major or C Mixolydian, which is F major. You could play either of those scales over top of C and F chord. That's an ambiguous chord progression, but you're playing inside, really. But because there's not enough information there to firmly say you're outside. But I'm going to demonstrate this first with an ambiguous, like a droning octave with a loop. And what I'm going to do is I'll talk us through, I'll try to play slower, and I'll play some different modes, and I want you to hear how I can really make all the modes work over top of just a droning C octave loop. Let's hear it. All right, here's C major. I'll just play one octave. Here's C Lydian. Here's C Mixolydian. That one reminds me of Scottish music. Bagpipes. The droning. I've literally heard bagpipers do that. They drone that away while they're playing melody, and it's Mixolydian. All right, here's a C Aeolian or C minor. It's nice. Here's C Dorian. Here's C Phyrgian. And finally, here's C Locrian. So since adding outside notes is a jazz thing, it's not only a jazz thing. It could be used in fusion. Well, I guess fusion is jazzy, but it could be used in prog rock and some more advanced classical music. But since I think of it as a jazz thing, I'm going to throw a looper for C major 7. We're going to think jazz modes. And where C major 7, normally you play C Ionian. That's going to work. I'm going to throw in C Lydian and C Mixolydian over this chord progression. I just kept it as a simple chord vamp. Let's see what it sounds like. C Lydian. Now I'll go to C Mixolydian. So let's go back and forth between them. So I'm on C Mixolydian, C Lydian, whoops, that was a little C Dorian. That's really outside, but that's Lydian. Mixolydian. Or Lydian. What I like to do is do modes of the melodic minor for jazz stuff. So this would be like a C, the third mode of the A melodic minor is C Lydian augmented. Come on, brain. Versus Ionian. Now you can do the same thing with minors. I'm not going to take you through those, but the idea is that you could potentially invoke a mode to add outside notes. And I just showed it to you with a simple chord vamp, but we could have tried it with more detailed, a more advanced chord progression. To be honest, when I'm adding outside notes, I don't normally think of modes except for the modes of the melodic minor when I'm doing jazz or blues. I do like to do that sometimes. So really quick example, if I'm playing a blues chord progression, 1-4-5, this is kind of a bonus. I'm going to show you in the key of C, if I do a 1-4-5 chord progression, what it would sound like if I add a Lydian dominant, which is the fourth mode, the melodic minor. I'm going to add that to our chord progression. Let's loop it and then I'll show you what it sounds like. Straight pentatonic so far. Just want you to hear the blues. Here's C Lydian dominant. Back to C pentatonic. Lydian dominant. I like to resolve it. So I'm back to pentatonic. I keep going in and out of it, okay? So that's the idea. Again, it's kind of a bonus because I'm showing you how I would invoke mode of the melodic minor. In this case, I'm doing it in more of a blues context, but to me, the most interesting blues music is a little bit of a fusion. It grabs a little bit of jazz from the outside, adds color, and then when it gets too heavy or it's too much, it brings it back to more familiar pentatonic blues goodness. And that's why I love guys like Robin Ford and Scott Henderson. But you're hearing me do that with a C Lydian dominant, fourth mode of the melodic minor. So I love doing that with the modes of the melodic minor more than the modes of the straight 7-note diatonic that we normally play and associate with Ionian, etc., the church modes. But that's the idea. You can potentially bring in modes from the outside of the chord progression or the key, notes that really aren't in your key signature, and you can add color. So I hope you found this video helpful. We've learned hopefully better how to use modes, how to recognize those modal chord progressions, and please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. I've got more plans coming up for 2024.